The letter found her the way official things rarely did when you lived in alleys. Nora Blackwell had spent 8 months teaching her daughter that invisibility was survival, that county offices and government envelopes brought nothing but complications for people like them. Yet here came the woman in the county jacket scanning the narrow space behind Morrison's diner with the dogged precision of someone who refused to accept that an address could simply not exist. November air cut through the overhang where they'd slept. Hazel pressed closer to her mother's side, 10 years old and already fluent in the language of danger. The sleeping bag they shared smelled permanently of damp and diesel, but it was theirs, and it was warm enough when the Tennessee nights hadn't yet turned brutal. The woman held an envelope like it might break. Nora's instinct was to disappear into the maze of dumpsters and loading docks, but something in the careful way the woman moved suggested this wasn't a threat. The embossed seal caught weak morning light. Tennessee Department of Probate Services. Hazel's grip tightened on Nora's arm. The gesture hurt more than the cold ever could. Protection reflex. No child should master that instinct before they learned algebra. Nora Blackwell. The name sounded foreign, spoken aloud. 8 months of being nobody had made her forget what it felt like to be identified, to have an identity that official systems recognized and tracked. "Who's asking?" professional courtesy edged the woman's voice. "County Probate Office. I've been trying to reach you for 3 months. 3 months. The distance between late summer and the first morning frost bit through worn sneakers. The gap between sleeping in parks and sleeping behind commercial kitchens when the parks closed for winter. The woman extended the envelope with both hands as if passing something precious rather than delivering news to the homeless. "It's about your grandmother. Adelaide Crane." The name hit like a physical blow. Adelaide. A voice from childhood that Nora had spent 16 years trying not to hear. The small cabin in the mountains. The smell of pine sap and old wood smoke. The relentless way Adelaide talked about the land like it had memory, like stones could hold grudges and trees could testify. Nora took the envelope slowly. Her fingers were stiff from cold and the particular exhaustion that came from never sleeping deeply enough to feel rested. She knew already. Had known somehow for 2 years without anyone telling her. The certainty had arrived one winter morning as a feeling that something fundamental had shifted in the world, like a weight being lifted from a scale she didn't know she was balancing. The woman's face softened in a way that confirmed everything. 2 winters ago. The estate was delayed. Complications with the property records, but you're listed as the last living heir. The property transfers to you. Property. The word felt absurd. Adelaide had owned a sagging mountain cabin and 80 acres of steep Tennessee woodland that nobody wanted. She died poor. Everyone knew it. The county had tried to take the land for back taxes twice while Nora was still a teenager, and Adelaide had fought them both times with fury that made grown men uncomfortable. Yet here was an envelope, legal and official, something Adelaide had left behind. Something that might have a door Hazel could lock. Nora signed the delivery slip with fingers that could barely hold the pen. The woman handed over the envelope, offered a sympathetic nod that somehow made everything worse, and walked back toward the mouth of the alley where a county sedan waited with its engine running. Hazel leaned against her mother. "Where is it?" Nora opened the envelope carefully, half expecting the paper to disintegrate like something from a dream. Inside was a deed printed on heavy stock that felt expensive and permanent. The legal description meant nothing to her. Township numbers, range markers, coordinates that pulsed on the page like something coded. But the address she recognized. Crane Ridge Road, Sevier County. The eastern slope of the Smoky Mountains where the elevation got serious and the winters came early and stayed late. A handwritten note was paper-clipped to the deed. County letterhead dated 3 weeks ago. Occupant rights valid. Beware structural weakness. Outbuilding condemned 1998. No taxes owed until reassessment. The kind of bureaucratic warning that tried to sound helpful but carried the faint smell of liability protection. Structural weakness could mean anything from a loose board to a collapsed foundation. Condemned outbuildings suggested something the county wanted demolished but couldn't afford to tear down. Still, it was a place. A structure with walls and a roof that might not leak too badly. An address that could receive mail, that could prove residency, that could open the tiny doors that led to bigger doors that led to the possibility of something resembling stability. Nora looked at her daughter. Hazel's face was pinched with cold and hope in equal measure. "We're going." She couldn't call it home. Home implied welcome, implied belonging. But it was a destination, and after 8 months of drifting that felt like mercy. They gathered their things, 2 backpacks worn shiny at the stress points, the sleeping bag that had become their only consistent possession, a thrift store coat that had given up on insulation but still blocked some wind. Everything they owned fit into 2 hands. The bus to Millbrook left in 40 minutes. Nora counted the emergency fund. $37 in ones and quarters, enough for 2 tickets with $3 left over. Hazel pressed close as they walked toward the station, moving through morning commuters like ghosts passing through the solid world. At the station, Nora bought tickets from a clerk who didn't look up from his phone. The bus was half empty. They took seats in the back where the engine noise would cover conversation, and Hazel could sleep without strangers watching. The city fell away behind them. Nashville's sprawl thinned into strip malls, then scattered houses, then the rolling Tennessee hills that deepened and darkened as they moved east. Hazel's head found her mother's shoulder. Within 15 minutes, the exhaustion of chronic uncertainty pulling her under. Nora stayed awake, watching the landscape change. The road climbed steadily. Bare trees lined the highway like anatomical diagrams, all structure and no decoration. The sky was the color of old steel. She'd last traveled this route at 17, running away from Adelaide's cabin with nothing but anger and a bus ticket her mother had sent from Knoxville. She'd sworn never to return, had built a life deliberately distant from these mountains. Nursing school in Memphis. Marriage to a man who'd seemed stable until the gambling debt surfaced. Hazel's birth in a hospital that smelled like bleach and new beginnings. Then the divorce. The cascade of financial collapse that followed. The realization that every safety net she'd believed in was made of paper, and the first strong wind had torn it all away. Going back to the mountains felt like admitting defeat, like the universe had a sense of humor dark enough to return her to the exact place she'd fled, only now broke and desperate instead of young and angry. The bus rattled through Sevierville, past Pigeon Forge with its tourist traps shuttered for the off-season, into Millbrook, where the road began to climb seriously, and the air thinned in that way that forced honest breathing. They got off at the last stop. The old gas station at the junction of Route 441 and Crane Ridge Road had closed years ago. Plywood covered the windows. Graffiti proclaimed territories and heartbreaks in equal measure. Nora shouldered both packs. Hazel walked beside her without complaint, though her legs had to be aching. The child had learned not to complain about physical discomfort. There were harder things to endure than tired muscles. Crane Ridge Road was gravel and mud. It climbed through second-growth forest that crowded close on both sides. The trees here were older than the ones near Nashville, thicker, darker. They stood in the particular silence of mountains in late autumn, after the birds have migrated, but before the snow muffles everything into absolute quiet. Hazel's breath clouded in front of her. What was she like, Grandma Adelaide? Nora picked her words carefully. The truth was complicated. Adelaide had been fierce and strange and utterly convinced of things that sounded like paranoia, until you lived in the mountains long enough to understand that isolation bred its own kind of clarity. Stubborn, kind in ways that didn't look like kindness. She believed the mountain taught you what you needed to learn. The path curved around a washout. Nora stepped over it automatically, muscle memory from childhood guiding her feet. What did you learn? The lie tasted familiar. I didn't stay long enough to find out, but she'd learned plenty. That poverty was a trap that closed slowly enough you didn't notice until it was too late. That being right about something didn't matter if nobody believed you. that the world had no obligation to care about your truth, especially when your truth made powerful people uncomfortable. Adelaide had tried to teach her those lessons. Nora had rejected them as the bitter philosophy of someone too stubborn to adapt. Now, 16 years later, she understood them in her bones. The path narrowed. Hazel moved closer, small hand finding Nora's. They walked in silence for another half-mile. The forest opened gradually. Through the thinning trees, Nora saw it. The cabin looked exactly as bad as she'd feared, and somehow worse than memory suggested. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired spine. Boards had curled away from the frame, exposing dark gaps. The porch had surrendered to gravity, completely collapsing into a sprawl of lumber and weeds that looked almost deliberate, like modern art about decay. Windows were either missing or broken. The chimney listed slightly to the left. The whole structure seemed held upright by stubbornness and the skeletal support of its own frame. Hazel's voice was small but not frightened. "It's really old, Mom." "It is. But it's ours." They approached slowly. Each step felt like walking into the past, into a version of herself she'd tried to bury. The yard was overgrown but not entirely wild. Someone had mowed at some point in the last year. The grass was short enough to see the ground. Nora reached the front door and stopped. It was closed but not locked. The handle turned easily, too easily. The hinges had been oiled recently. She could smell it. 3-in-1 oil, the kind Adelaide used to keep in the kitchen for every squeaking hinge and sticky drawer. The door swung inward without protest. Inside, dust drifted in shafts of late afternoon light, but not thick dust. Not the accumulated sediment of 2 years' abandonment. The floors were swept. The corners were clear. Someone had been here recently, regularly. The living room still held Adelaide's rocking chair. The runners were cracked, but the frame was solid. A cast-iron stove hunched in the corner, its surface clean of rust. The air smelled of old wood and something else. Wild thyme. Adelaide used to hang bundles from the ceiling beams. Hazel walked in slowly, eyes wide. "It's like a story, one with ghosts." Nora set the packs down near the stove. "Maybe. But we're the living ones here." The kitchen was through a doorway that had never had a door. The counter was rough-hewn wood worn smooth by decades of use. A dry sink, a hand pump that probably didn't work, shelves with a few dusty mason jars still lined up like soldiers. Nora tried the pump. It resisted, then gave. Water coughed out brown, then cleared, cold and mineral sharp. Someone had kept the well maintained. She opened drawers mechanically, looking for what she didn't know. Proof of occupancy, evidence of life. The third drawer stuck. Nora worked it gently until it slid open. Inside was a single folded piece of paper, heavy stock, the kind Adelaide saved from important letters and reused for her own purposes. Nora unfolded it with hands that wanted to shake. The handwriting was unmistakable. Adelaide's cramped, deliberate script, the letters formed with arthritic fingers, but absolute intention. "If you're reading this, you found your way back. Good. The mountain's been waiting. Nothing else. No explanation, no sentiment. Pure Adelaide. Say what needs saying, nothing more." Nora tucked the note into her pocket. Her chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. From the living room, Hazel called out, "Mom, there's wood for the stove." A stack of split firewood sat beside the cast-iron stove. Dry recently, split the cut surfaces still pale. Nora stared at it. Adelaide had been dead for 2 years. Someone was maintaining this house. Oiling hinges, splitting wood, keeping the well clear. She pushed the thought aside. Survival first, mysteries later. They built a fire. The first match caught quickly. The kindling took with the eager hunger of dry wood and cold air. Within minutes, warmth began seeping into the room. Hazel pulled the sleeping bag close to the stove and sat cross-legged, soaking in heat like a plant leaning toward sunlight. Nora found candles in a kitchen cabinet, 3 thick pillars barely used. She lit them as darkness pressed against the windows. The house transformed in candlelight. Shadows softened the decay. The worn surfaces looked lived in rather than abandoned. She explored while Hazel warmed herself. The hallway behind the kitchen was narrow and creaky. Each board announced her weight with sounds that ranged from whisper to complaint. At the end of the hall was the bedroom she'd shared with her mother during the brief years they'd lived here before her mother decided the mountains were suffocating and dragged 7-year-old Nora to Knoxville in search of something better that never materialized. The iron bed frame was still there. A quilt, faded to the color of old newsprint, covered the mattress. Dust lay thick on the windowsill, but the floor had been swept. The same pattern. Recent maintenance. Deliberate care. Nora approached the bed slowly, sat on the edge. The frame creaked, but held. Under the pillow her fingers found paper. An envelope sealed. Her name on the front in Adelaide's handwriting. She opened it carefully in the candlelight. Inside was a photograph and another note. The photograph was Nora at 7, standing in the same yard holding a bucket of wild blackberries. Her face was smeared with purple juice and a huge smile. She remembered that day with painful clarity. The sun hot on her shoulders. Adelaide teaching her which berries were ripe by feel as much as color. The satisfaction of a bucket filled by her own small hands. The note was brief. You were right to leave. I was wrong to keep secrets. But some truths need time to ripen. Cedar Ridge Trail Marker 7. Follow Ash. He remembers what I couldn't tell you. Nora read it 3 times. Cedar Ridge Trail ran behind the house deeper into the mountain. Marker 7 was about a mile up. She remembered it. A boundary marker from when the land was surveyed decades ago. But Ash. Adelaide's horse. A chestnut gelding she'd kept until he was ancient by horse standards. He would have been 26 when Adelaide died. No horse survived 2 years alone in these mountains. Except the wood was fresh split. The floor was swept. The hinges were oiled. Nora folded the note and photograph carefully, put them in her pocket with the first note. Evidence of Adelaide reaching across death with the same stubborn insistence she'd brought to everything in life. She returned to the living room. Hazel had curled up in the sleeping bag, eyes heavy. There's a bed. We can sleep warmer. Together they moved the sleeping bag to the bedroom, spread it over the quilt for extra insulation. Hazel climbed in without hesitation. Exhaustion had lowered her standards for acceptable sleeping conditions months ago. Nora lay beside her daughter. The mattress was lumpy, but not terrible. Through the broken window, cold air drifted in, but the thick quilt and sleeping bag created a cocoon of relative warmth. Hazel's voice was drowsy. It's better than the alley. It is. Are we staying? The question hung in the dark. Nora had no answer. Staying required plans she didn't have, resources that didn't exist, solutions to problems she hadn't begun to solve. For now, rest. Hazel's breathing deepened within minutes. The absolute sleep of childhood when the body demanded unconsciousness and got it regardless of circumstance. Nora stayed awake. The house settled around them with the particular sounds of old wood adjusting to temperature changes. Beams contracting joints, shifting the vocabulary of a structure that had weathered decades and wasn't ready to quit yet. Through the window she could see the tree-lined dark shapes against slightly less dark sky, the mountains rising beyond like the curved backs of sleeping giants. A shape moved outside. Nora sat up slowly, watched. There between the house and the forest, something large moving with deliberate slowness. Her heart rate kicked up. Bear. Black bears were common here. They denned for winter, but a warm autumn could keep them active late. But the shape was wrong for a bear. Too tall, too angular. It stepped into a patch of moonlight and Nora's breath caught. A horse, chestnut coat with a silver blaze down the muzzle, moving stiffly but steadily toward the house. Stopping 20 feet from the collapsed porch, looking directly at the bedroom window. Ash. Impossible. Adelaide's horse. 28 years old minimum. Horses didn't live this long, especially not alone in the wild. But there he stood. Real. Solid. Breath steaming in the cold air. The horse met Nora's eyes through the broken window. The gaze was almost human in its intensity. Recognition flickered across that ancient equine face. She whispered without meaning to, "You can't be here." The horse snorted softly, pawed the ground once, then lowered his head until his muzzle was inches from the window opening. Nora slipped out of bed carefully. Hazel didn't stir. She moved to the window, heart pounding with adrenaline that had no clear outlet. The horse waited patient as stone. She reached through the broken pane. Her fingers found the warm silk of his muzzle. He breathed against her palm. Steady, real, impossible, but undeniable. His breath misted in the cold. He nudged her hand gently, then her coat pocket. She frowned, reached in, pulled out the folded notes. The horse nudged them again, insistent but gentle. Nora unfolded the second note, read it again by moonlight. Cedar Ridge Trail Marker 7. Follow Ash. He remembers what I couldn't tell you. The horse stepped back, turned slowly, faced the tree line, looked back at her once, then began walking toward the forest. Every rational thought in Nora's head screamed that this was impossible. Horses didn't live 28 years. They didn't survive 2 winters alone. They didn't appear at exactly the right moment to guide people to mysterious destinations. But rationality had stopped being a reliable framework for understanding the world around the time she lost her job and her apartment in the same week. Reality, she'd learned, was more flexible than she'd been taught to believe. The universe had its own logic that didn't consult human expectations. And Adelaide had never lied to her. Never. She'd kept secrets. She'd been difficult and strange and impossible. But she hadn't dealt in deception. The horse waited at the tree line. Nora looked back at Hazel, sleeping deeply safe for the moment in a house that was warmer than an alley. She grabbed her coat, pulled on her boots, checked that the kitchen matches were in her pocket, along with the small flashlight she'd shoplifted from a gas station 3 weeks ago. She paused at the bedroom door. "I'll be back soon." Then she stepped outside into the November cold and followed a ghost horse into the forest. Ash moved slowly but with complete certainty. He knew exactly where he was going. Nora followed the flashlight beam bouncing ahead of her. The trail was narrow and overgrown but still visible. Deer used it probably. Maybe hikers in summer. The trees closed in. Tall oaks and hickories, their bare branches creating a lattice against the sky. The temperature dropped as they climbed. Nora's breath clouded thick in front of her face. The horse never looked back, just maintained his steady pace upward. After 20 minutes, Nora saw it. Marker 7. A weathered wooden post with a rusted metal tag stamped with the number, the official boundary of Adelaide's 80 acres. Ash turned sharply to the left off the main trail onto a path so faint Nora would have missed it completely. They pushed through undergrowth. Branches caught at Nora's coat. The ground was uneven rocks hidden under leaves waiting to turn an ankle. Then the trees opened into a small clearing. In the center stood a structure Nora had never seen before, or had forgotten so completely it felt new. A small building, stone walls, maybe 10 feet by 12. Old, older than the house. She could tell by the style of masonry, the kind of construction that predated modern tools. Hand-cut stone fitted together with the patience of people who measured time differently. The wooden door hung slightly crooked. Deep scratches marked its surface. Not weather damage. Something had tried to get in with metal tools. Recently. The gouges were fresh, the wood pale where it had been cut. The horse stopped in front of the building, turned to face Nora, waited. She approached slowly. The door had a simple latch, rusted but functional. She lifted it. The door swung inward with a groan of metal and wood that hadn't moved in decades. The smell hit first. Damp wood. Rust. And underneath something else. Metallic, faintly sweet like minerals dissolved in water that had sat too long. She raised the flashlight. The beam cut across a room stacked floor to ceiling with wooden crates. Military style. Stamped with faded logos and text. Nora stepped inside. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The nearest crate bore a marking she could still read despite decades of fade. Titan Mining Corporation. Confidential. 1987. Her mind raced. Titan Mining. The company Adelaide used to rant about. The thieves who stole from the mountain. The liars who drilled where they had no right. Everyone in town had thought Adelaide was paranoid. The county had dismissed her claims. The company had threatened her with lawsuits for defamation. But here were crates, dozens of them, stamped with Titan's logo, hidden in a building nobody knew existed. Nora found a rusted crowbar leaning against the wall, wedged it under the nearest crate's lid. The wood resisted, then cracked. Nails screamed as they pulled free. The lid fell away. Inside, wrapped in canvas that had kept them protected for decades, were metal cylinders. Dozens of them, each about 18 inches long, 2 inches in diameter. Heavy. She lifted one carefully. It was warm, not room temperature, genuinely warm, like it held some internal heat source. Stamped into the metal cap were numbers. A date. March 15th, 1987. And coordinates. Not addresses. Geographic coordinates in degrees and minutes. She unwrapped another cylinder. Same type. Different date. Different coordinates. These were core samples. Geological surveys. Drill cores taken from deep underground. The kind of thing mining companies use to assess mineral deposits. Behind her, Ash snorted sharply. His ears pinned back. Muscles tensed under his coat. Nora spun. Through the open door in the darkness beyond the clearing, something moved. Not an animal. The weight was wrong. The rhythm too deliberate. A branch cracked loud in the night silence. 50 yards away, maybe less. Then another sound. Fabric brushing against bark. Boot soles scraping on stone. Someone was out there, watching. Ash backed away from the doorway. The horse's fear was contagious, primal. Nora grabbed the nearest core sample, shoved it into her coat pocket, snatched 2 more for good measure. She pulled the door closed as quietly as she could. The latch clicked home with a sound that seemed deafening. The footsteps stopped. In the sudden silence, Nora could hear her own pulse, Ash's breathing, the wind in the high branches. Then deliberately a flashlight beam cut through the trees, sweeping, searching. Nora didn't wait. She grabbed Ash's mane and pulled herself alongside him. They moved together back toward the trail, fast but controlled. Every instinct screamed to run, but knowing that running blind on this terrain in the dark would end badly. Behind them, the flashlight beam found the stone building, held there. A voice cut through the night. Male. Older. Not calling out. Just speaking into a phone or radio. They found it. 2 words. Quiet. Matter of fact. Terror spiked through Nora's chest. They. Plural. Someone had been waiting for this, expecting it. She and Ash reached the main trail. The horse broke into a careful trot. Nora ran alongside, hand tangled in his mane for balance. Her lungs burned. The core samples banged against her ribs with each step. The flashlight beam swung toward them, too far to illuminate but close enough to track movement. Then she heard the second beam, coming from another direction. Flanking. 2 people. Maybe more. The cabin appeared below through the trees. Warm light from the candles visible through the windows. Hazel was in there. Alone. Unprotected. Nora's legs found strength she didn't know she had. She crashed through the last of the undergrowth and stumbled into the yard. Ash stopped at the edge of the tree line, watching. His role as guide complete. Nora ran to the front door. It was still unlocked exactly as she'd left it. She slipped inside, closed it, locked it with the old bolt that probably wouldn't stop anyone determined. Her hands shook as she checked the windows, looking for movement, for flashlight beams. Nothing. The forest was dark and silent again. She checked the back of the house, the kitchen window that faced the mountain. It had been fully closed when they arrived. Now it was open an inch, just enough to slip fingers through and lift. Someone had been here, in the house, while she was gone. Fresh boot prints marked the kitchen floor. Mud. Recent. Leading from the back door to the hallway to the bedroom. Nora's vision tunneled. She ran to the bedroom. Hazel was still there, still sleeping, undisturbed. But someone had stood in this room. The bootprints stopped at the foot of the bed. Someone had looked at her daughter while she slept. Nora's hands clenched. The core samples in her pocket dug into her ribs. She checked the rest of the house, found nothing else disturbed, closed and locked every window that still had a working latch, dragged the heavy rocking chair in front of the back door. Then she returned to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed with her back to the wall and her flashlight in her hand. Outside, Ash stood guard in the moonlight, patient as death itself. Nora didn't sleep. She watched the windows, listened to every sound. The house settling, the wind moving through empty places, the particular quality of silence that forms when danger stops announcing itself and just waits. Hazel slept on, innocent of the fear that had her mother's heart racing, innocent of the bootprints that had stopped inches from her sleeping face. As dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Nora's exhausted mind finally began to process what had happened. Adelaide had hidden evidence of something big enough that people were still watching for it 37 years later. Big enough to maintain surveillance on an abandoned house. Big enough to follow Nora and her daughter the moment they arrived. The core samples in her pocket suddenly felt heavier than their actual weight. Whatever Adelaide had discovered, whatever Titan mining had done, it wasn't over. And now Nora and Hazel were standing directly in the middle of something they didn't understand. Morning arrived cold and sharp. Nora sat against the bedroom wall, still dressed, the flashlight dead in her hand. Hazel woke slowly, blinking in the gray light filtering through broken windows. The child took in her mother's rigid posture without comment. 8 months homeless had taught her to read danger in silence. Nora's voice came out rougher than intended. "We need to go into town." She wrapped one of the core samples in a kitchen towel. The metal cylinder felt warm even through the fabric, a physical impossibility that her exhausted mind couldn't process. The other 2 samples she hid beneath a loose floorboard in the bedroom closet, covering them with the same dusty debris that had concealed the hiding spot. They ate stale crackers from Hazel's backpack, drank water from the hand pump. The normalcy of breakfast felt obscene given what Nora had witnessed in the dark. Outside, Ash stood exactly where he'd been at dawn. The horse's presence should have seemed impossible, but Nora's capacity for disbelief had limits, and she'd exceeded them sometime around 2 in the morning. She approached him carefully, laid her palm against his neck. "Thank you." The horse's ear flicked. He lowered his head to graze the short grass, unconcerned. The walk into Millbrook took 90 minutes. Hazel asked no questions, a restraint that hurt worse than curiosity would have. They passed 2 other hikers on the trail down. Both offered friendly nods. Normal people doing normal things in a world that felt anything but. The town smelled of wood smoke and tourist season emptiness. Most shops were closed until spring. The few locals on the streets moved with the efficiency of people conserving energy for the long winter ahead. The library sat on a side street, brick and glass, built in the optimistic expansion of the 80s. Nora pushed through the double doors into warm air that smelled of old paper and floor wax. Behind the circulation desk, a woman with steel gray hair twisted into a tortoiseshell clip looked up sharply. Her eyes were the pale blue of deep ice, assessing immediately. "You look like you need answers, not directions." Nora set the wrapped core sample on the desk. The towel fell away. The woman's expression shifted, recognition mixed with something darker. "I haven't seen one of those in decades." Her fingers hovered near the cylinder, close enough to feel the residual warmth. "I found crates of them behind my grandmother's house." The librarian's gaze sharpened. "Who was your grandmother, Adelaide Crane?" The name landed like a stone in still water. Ripples of memory crossed the woman's face. She stood slowly, movements deliberate. "Adelaide came here once? 15 years ago, maybe more?" She was shouting about stolen land, corporate theft. Had documents, maps, samples like this one. The voice dropped, shame coloring the admission. "We called security. Had her removed." She was making the other patrons uncomfortable. The regret of someone who chose order over truth and lived long enough to question the choice. I'm sorry, we should have listened. Nora's throat tightened, proof that Adelaide hadn't been paranoid or delusional just early. Can you tell me what this is? The librarian studied the cylinder. Drill core sample. Geological survey. I worked Forest Service before this job. We used them to assess mineral deposits. She gestured toward the back of the library. Dr. Whitmore is here today. Retired geology professor from University of Tennessee. Tuesdays are his map days. He'd know more. She led them through the stacks to a reading room where maps covered every available surface. Topographic surveys, mineral surveys, watershed maps. A tall man stood hunched over a table, magnifying glass in hand, examining contour lines with the intensity of someone reading scripture. Dr. Bennett Whitmore looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts. Too tall, too thin, stooped from decades of peering at things smaller than they should be. His flannel shirt was worn soft at the elbows. Wire-rimmed glasses, magnified eyes that missed nothing. The librarian made brief introductions. Ruth Pemberton, she offered, before leaving them alone. Whitmore approached the core sample like it was a religious artifact, lifted it carefully, turned it toward the window light. His fingers traced the stamped numbers with practiced familiarity. Spodumene. See this pale band, lithium-bearing mineral. He rotated the cylinder slowly. High grade. Maybe 1.5% lithium content. Beautiful specimen. The voice carried detached appreciation of someone who'd spent a career studying rock composition, but his hands trembled slightly. Do you know what lithium was worth in 1987? Almost nothing. Electric car batteries didn't exist. Grid-scale storage was science fiction. This mineral was industrial waste. He set the core down with exaggerated care. Do you know what it's worth now? $80,000 per ton. The number hung in the air. Nora's mind struggled to process it. She'd found dozens of these cylinders, maybe hundreds in those crates. Whitmore pulled out a geological survey map of Sevier County, spread it across the table with the reverence of someone handling original scripture. Where exactly did you find this? Nora pointed to the approximate location of the stone building. Whitmore measured coordinates with a ruler cross-referenced with the number stamped on the core sample. His face went white. This coordinate is 400 feet north of Titan Mining's lease boundary. He looked up at Nora with something approaching awe. They drilled on your grandmother's land, illegally, and they found one of the richest lithium deposits in the eastern United States. Hazel had been silent throughout, but now she moved closer to study the map. Her small finger followed the property boundary. How much is under our land? Whitmore did rapid calculations on a notepad, numbers accumulated with terrifying speed. Your grandmother owned 80 acres. Based on this core depth and lithium content, I'd estimate 2 to 3 million tons of recoverable ore. He wrote a final figure and pushed it toward Nora. Current market value somewhere between $160 and $240 million. The room tilted. Nora gripped the table edge. Your grandmother was sitting on a fortune, and Titan Mining stole it. Whitmore was already moving, gathering maps, pulling reference books from shelves. You need legal representation. Someone willing to fight a corporation with deep pockets and no conscience. He scribbled an address on a scrap of paper. Judith Harlow. Best litigation attorney in 3 counties. Handles cases on contingency, which means you don't pay unless you win. The address was local. A white house on Oak Street converted to office space. Whitmore's eyes were bright with something Nora recognized as righteous anger. Adelaide tried to tell people 30 years ago. Nobody listened because she had no proof they couldn't destroy or discredit. He tapped the core sample. Now you have proof. Don't let them silence you the way they silenced her. The walk to Judith Harlow's office took 10 minutes. The White House sat behind a crooked sign that read, "No appointment, no problem," in hand-painted letters. The front porch doubled as a waiting room, empty at midday. Inside smelled of coffee and old wood. A woman in her early 40s sat behind a desk buried under case files. Her black hair was pulled into a severe bun. dark eyes assessed Nora and Hazel with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd learned to judge character quickly. Judith Harlow didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Sit. Tell me everything." Nora laid out the sequence. The inheritance, the stone building, the crates stamped with Titan mining logos, Whitmore's analysis, the men in the forest, the bootprints in the house. She produced the core sample. Judith examined it without touching. "Whitmore sent you?" "Yes." "Then the mineral analysis is solid. He's the best we've got." She pulled a yellow legal pad from a drawer, started taking notes in shorthand that looked like encryption. "Mineral trespass. Statute of limitations is 10 years from discovery. You discovered it 2 days ago. Clock starts now." She leaned back, fingers steepled. "Titan Mining Corporation. Current market capitalization, $4.8 billion. Their Tennessee lithium operation generates $600 million in annual revenue." The numbers were delivered flatly, without emphasis. Just facts that needed stating. Built entirely on reserves they extracted from land they didn't own. Judith slid a contract across the desk. "I work on contingency. If we win or reach settlement, I take 33%. If we lose, you owe nothing." She tapped the core sample with one manicured nail. "But this has teeth. Real teeth. Are you prepared for what that means?" Nora's voice was steadier than she felt. "Tell me." "Titan will fight. They'll claim the samples are forged, the coordinates falsified. Your grandmother was mentally incompetent. They have lawyers whose only job is making problems disappear." Judith's expression hardened. "They'll investigate you, dig into every mistake you've made, every vulnerability. They'll use your homelessness, your divorce, anything that makes you look unstable or desperate." She glanced at Hazel. "They'll question whether you're a fit parent, whether you're using your daughter to gain sympathy." The threat was delivered clinically, but Nora felt it like a physical blow. Hazel's hand found hers under the table. "Can they take her?" "Not if we're prepared. Not if we document everything, follow every rule, and build a case so airtight they can't find oxygen." Judith pushed the contract closer. "I've been waiting 15 years for a case like this. A clear villain, compelling facts, and a plaintiff whose story matters. But I need to know you won't break. Because they will come at you with everything. And I mean everything." Nora thought about the bootprints by Hazel's bed. The men in the forest. The 2 years someone had watched that house waiting. They already started. Something fierce crossed Judith's face. "Good. Then we won't waste time pretending this is civil." Nora signed the contract. Her handwriting looked shaky next to Judith's precise signature, but it was legally binding. Judith immediately began organizing. She drafted a statement for Nora to sign, contacted Whitmore about providing expert testimony, started building a timeline of Titan's operations in the area. "We need more than one core sample. We need to document everything in that building before Titan can claim it's contaminated evidence." She grabbed her phone. "I'm calling the county sheriff. We'll get those crates photographed and cataloged today. Official record before anything disappears." The next 3 weeks blurred into a sequence of depositions, document reviews, and meetings with people whose expertise Nora barely understood. Whitmore prepared a 47-page technical analysis of the core samples, complete with mineralogical assays and geographic surveys proving the drilling occurred outside Titan's lease. Ruth produced meeting minutes from a county commission hearing in 1987. Adelaide's name appeared 3 times. Each mention dismissed her claims as unsubstantiated and lacking credible evidence. The commission had voted unanimously to take no action. Then Walter Dunmore appeared. He walked into Judith's office on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a ledger so old the binding had disintegrated into loose pages. 72 years old, spine curved from decades of manual labor, hands gnarled with arthritis. "I was a drill technician for Titan. 35 years. His voice was gravel and regret. "I kept records they told me to destroy." Judith invited him in, made tea with the efficiency of someone who understood that confession required ritual. Walter opened the ledger with trembling hands. Daily logs of drilling operations, Dates, locations, depths, supervisors. Technical details that meant nothing to Nora but made Judith's eyes go wide. Walter pointed to entries from March 1987. Off-lease drilling crane property 340 feet. The dates matched the core samples exactly. In the margin, handwritten in faded pencil, were initials. W.D. That's me, Walter Dunmore. I logged every sample I pulled. He turned to another page. More entries, more coordinates that fell outside Titan's legal boundaries. Supervisor ordered silence. Said we'd all be terminated if word got out. I had a wife, kids in school. I needed the job. His hand shook, holding the teacup. Adelaide Crane came to the drilling site once. Security escorted her away, called her paranoid. Hysterical woman. He looked at Nora with eyes that had seen too much and done too little. I'm 72, stage 3 lung cancer. Weeks left, maybe. I've carried this guilt for 35 years. I want to die clean. Adelaide died alone. People called her crazy. That's on me. I knew she was right and said nothing. He pushed the ledger toward Judith. Now I'm making it right. Judith drafted Walter's sworn affidavit that same day, had it notarized within hours. Added it to the evidence file that was growing thicker daily. A game-changing witness. Inside knowledge. 3.5 decades of documentation that Titan couldn't explain away. Titan's response came within a week. A stack of legal documents 4 inches thick. Denials of every allegation. Claims that the core samples were forgeries. The coordinates fabricated, the ledger a crude attempt at fraud. Their lead attorney, Clayton Ashford, requested an immediate dismissal hearing. The county courthouse was newer than the library but carried the same institutional smell. Bleach and bureaucracy. The hearing room was small, designed for preliminary motions rather than full trials. Ashford arrived with 2 junior attorneys and a paralegal carrying 3 briefcases. 51, silver-haired, with the kind of face that photographed well and projected competence. His suit probably cost more than Nora had earned in 6 months of nursing. Judge Patricia Calloway presided with the exhausted patience of someone who'd seen every variation of corporate malfeasance and had stopped being surprised. Ashford's opening was smooth, practiced. He positioned Adelaide as a troubled woman who'd harassed Titan for decades, suggested the core samples had been planted. Recently implied that Nora was exploiting her grandmother's mental instability for financial gain. Mrs. Crane was non-compos mentis. Her claims delusional. Multiple county officials can testify to her erratic behavior. Judith rose slowly. When she spoke, her voice carried none of Ashford's polish, but had something harder underneath. Poverty isn't mental illness, Your Honor. It's what happens when corporations steal from the powerless and then gaslight them when they fight back. She presented Whitmore's analysis. Walter's ledger. The county meeting minutes showing Adelaide's claims were dismissed without investigation. Titan wants this dismissed because discovery will expose 37 years of systematic theft. They're not protecting their reputation. They're protecting their profits. Judge Calloway studied the evidence for 10 minutes. The courtroom was silent except for the clock above the bench ticking toward a decision that would determine whether Nora's fight ended before it began. Finally, Calloway looked up. Motion to dismiss is denied. This case proceeds to discovery. Titan will provide all records of drilling operations in Sevier County from 1985 to 1995. Her gavel fell. Final. Ashford's face remained neutral, but something cold flickered in his eyes as he passed Nora on his way out. That evening, Hazel noticed the car first. "Mom, that car's been behind us since town." Nora checked the rearview mirror of the borrowed truck Judith had loaned them. A dark sedan, nondescript, following at exactly the legal distance. She took an unnecessary turn. The sedan followed. Another turn. Still there. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. The truck rattled over the rutted mountain road. The sedan maintained position. It followed them all the way to Crane Ridge Road, then stopped at the junction. Watched. Didn't follow onto the private drive. Just made sure Nora knew she was being observed. The next day, their front tire blew on the way down the mountain. Nora pulled over cursing, examined the damage. Not wear. Not a puncture from road debris. A 4-inch nail driven straight through the tread at a perfect 90-degree angle. She walked the road, found 5 more nails, placed at even intervals across the gravel. Deliberate, calculated. Hazel's voice was small. Someone put those there. Nora called Judith, documented everything with photographs, filed a police report. The deputy who responded was polite but skeptical. Could be kids. Happens sometimes. His eyes said he didn't believe it. He knew exactly what this was. 4 days later, they returned from a meeting with Whitmore to find the bedroom window shattered. Not cracked. Completely destroyed. Glass scattered across the floor in a pattern suggesting deliberate force. Nothing stolen. But someone had walked through every room. Mud in drawers, checked closets, searched. Fresh boot prints marked the kitchen floor. Size 13 work boots with a distinctive tread pattern. The prints led from the back door through the hallway to Hazel's bed. Stopped there. Nora photographed everything, called the sheriff. The same deputy responded. This time he didn't suggest kids. You should consider staying somewhere else until your legal situation resolves. Translation. You're making powerful people uncomfortable, and I can't protect you. The electrical service cut off 3 days later. Nora called the utility company. Outstanding balance of $840. I paid that 2 weeks ago. Our records show non-payment. Service restoration requires 7 to 10 business days after balance clears. Judith made calls, discovered the payment had been misrouted by a system error, demanded immediate restoration. Got promises but no action. They lived without electricity. Wood stove for heat, candles for light, the hand pump for water. Hazel adapted with the resilience of children who'd survived worse. But Nora saw the fear creeping back into her daughter's eyes, the hypervigilance that had started to fade now returning with doubled intensity. On a Thursday evening, an SUV blocked the road. Nora stopped the truck 30 feet back. Ash, who'd taken to following them partway down the mountain each morning, tensed beside the vehicle. A man stepped out, hands visible, movements non-threatening. Clayton Ashford, dressed down in jeans and a wool coat, looking almost approachable. Miss Blackwell, I think we should talk. Nora killed the engine but didn't get out. We have nothing to discuss outside court. Ashford approached, slowly stopping at a respectful distance. I'm not here in an official capacity. This is neighbor to neighbor. His smile was practiced, sincere enough to be insulting. We both know where this is heading. Years of litigation, mounting legal costs, uncertainty. He leaned against his vehicle with calculated casualness. Titan is prepared to offer $500,000. Cash settlement. You sign over mineral rights, we part as friends. The number was enormous, life-changing. Everything Nora hadn't had for so long, the concept felt theoretical. That's generous compensation for what amounts to a property dispute. Nora's laugh was sharp. If you're offering $500,000, the land is worth 10 times that. Ashford's expression didn't change, but something hardened behind his eyes. Court is unpredictable. Juries are fickle. You could spend 3 years fighting and walk away with nothing. He pushed off the SUV, took a single step closer. Think about your daughter. She needs stability, certainty. That money provides both. What it provides is silence. Ashford's professional mask slipped fractionally. Mountain roads are dangerous, Miss Blackwell. Accidents happen, especially in winter, especially to people who aren't familiar with the terrain anymore. The threat wasn't even thinly veiled. It was there, naked and deliberate. Nora held his gaze. If I make a mistake, it'll be mine, not because someone scared me into it. She restarted the truck. Ashford stepped aside, but his voice followed her. You're making enemies you can't afford. 2 days later, Hazel was walking home from the bus stop. The route was a mile of gravel road through forest. She'd made the walk dozens of times. A black pickup drove slowly beside her, matching her pace. The passenger window rolled down. Tell your mom smart people take the money. Kids need safe homes, not legal battles. The truck accelerated away before Hazel could respond. She ran the last quarter mile, burst into the house shaking. Nora called Judith immediately, then the sheriff, then the FBI field office in Knoxville. Witness intimidation, a federal crime. An agent took Hazel's statement, documented the vehicle description, promised investigation. But promises didn't stop the black pickup from appearing again 2 days later, parked at the end of Crane Ridge Road, just visible from the house. Watching. Nora found herself back in Adelaide's bedroom that night after Hazel had finally fallen asleep from exhaustion. The trunk at the foot of the bed that she'd noticed but not explored. She opened it slowly, expecting more journals. Instead, she found letters, dozens of them. Correspondence between Adelaide and someone named Ellen. It took Nora 3 letters to realize. Ellen was her mother. The dates spanned 1990 to 2007. Nora's hands shook as she read chronologically. A letter from Ellen dated 1995. Mama, I can't fight them with you. They offered me $50,000 to leave with Nora and never tell her about the land. I'm taking it. I'm sorry. I'm weak. But I need to give Nora stability. Adelaide's reply, precise handwriting, tight with controlled emotion. You're not weak. You're scared. But you're teaching her to run. I won't tell her about the money. But someday she'll need to know the truth. Another, from Ellen. 2007. Nora's leaving at 17. She's angry about your obsession with the land. I never told her it was worth millions. How could I? She thinks I left because you're crazy. I let her think that. I'm sorry. Nora's vision blurred. Her mother hadn't just left the mountains. She'd taken a bribe. $50,000 to silence both of them, to take 7-year-old Nora away and never mention Adelaide's claims again. 16 years of thinking her mother was ambitious, wanted a better life. The truth was simpler and more painful. Her mother was scared, took money, silenced herself and her daughter for what amounted to nothing in the face of what the land was actually worth. Hazel found her crying an hour later, letters scattered across the bed. The child sat beside her mother without speaking for a long moment. Finally, quiet as snow, Grandma Adelaide forgave her. You can too. The fire started at 2 in the morning. Nora woke to the smell wrong immediately. Not wood smoke from the stove, chemical, gasoline. She ran to the window. The stone building was burning, flames 50 feet high turning night into orange day. She grabbed her phone, called 911, then sprinted toward the blaze. Ash was already there, circling the perimeter, panicked but unable to approach the heat. The fire was too hot, too fast. Professional. Nora tried to get close with a bucket from the well, but the intensity drove her back. The building had been doused thoroughly. This wasn't accident. This was expertise. Whitmore appeared from the direction of his property half a mile away. Walter from the opposite direction, sick and weak but determined. They formed a line, passing buckets, but it was futile. The fire was too established. The volunteer fire department arrived 20 minutes later. By then, 40% of the building had collapsed. The remaining structure was unsalvageable. As dawn broke over smoking ruins, a state fire investigator walked the perimeter with a camera and evidence bags. He found the gasoline can in the underbrush. Size 13 boot prints in the mud. Tire tracks from a vehicle that had parked 50 yards away. Professional arson. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. But 60% of the crates had survived. The core samples Nora had removed were safe in the cabin. The ledger was in Judith's office safe. The evidence was diminished, but not destroyed. The investigator photographed everything, documented the accelerant placement, the timing designed for maximum damage with minimal risk of spreading to the main forest. Judith arrived as they were bagging evidence. Her face was stone. They're rattled, desperate, which means they're scared. She turned to Nora. Good. Fear makes people sloppy. The FBI opened an official investigation into the arson within 3 days. subpoenaed phone records, found a private investigator named Douglas Vail whose calls pinged off cell towers near the property the night of the fire. Vail's bank account showed a $25,000 wire transfer from a Titan mining consulting account 3 days before the blaze. Pressure mounted. Titan stock dipped 2% on rumors of an investigation. Shareholders demanded answers. The CEO faced awkward questions during a quarterly earnings call. Then Judith's phone rang. She put it on speaker in her office. Nora and Hazel present. "This is Clayton Ashford. I'm calling to discuss settlement." Judith's voice was ice. "I'm listening. 2.5 million. Final offer. Your client signs a comprehensive release, transfers mineral rights, and this ends." The number was staggering, more than Nora had imagined possible. "I'll need to review the terms with my client." "Fine. I'm having the contract couriered today. You have 48 hours. He hung up. The contract arrived 3 hours later. 47 pages of dense legal language. Judith read it twice, then a third time with a yellow highlighter marking sections. She looked up at Nora. Section 14, subsection C. Non-disclosure agreement. Perpetual and binding on you and your heirs. She flipped pages. You can never discuss this case, never write about it, never mention Titan mining in any public forum. Hazel inherits that silence. More pages. Future claims waiver. You give up any right to sue for additional damages even if evidence emerges of worse conduct. She set the document down. They're offering $2.5 million to bury a $200 million crime. The room was silent except for Hazel's breathing and the tick of the wall clock. Judith's voice was careful. "It's your decision. This is life-changing money. I won't judge whatever you choose." Nora stared at the contract, at the number with all those zeros at the signature line that would end the fear and the watching and the bootprints by her daughter's bed. She thought about Adelaide dying alone, called crazy by people who refused to see truth when it made them uncomfortable. About how silence corrodes everything it touches, eating away at the foundation of what it means to live with integrity. Nora pushed the contract back across the desk. "Tell them no." The silence in Judith's office stretched taut. Hazel looked at her mother with something between pride and fear. Judith's expression didn't change, but her eyes carried a glint of satisfaction. "You're sure Nora thought about the bootprints? The fire? The men who'd watched her daughter sleep? They'd tried to buy her silence with fear, then with money. Both were the same transaction. Trading truth for safety. Adelaide had refused that trade for 37 years, I'm sure." Judith closed the contract without reading further. "Then we make them earn every dollar they offer, and we get that sentence in writing, no matter what it costs them." That night, back at the cabin with the wood stove crackling and Hazel finally asleep, Nora sat in Adelaide's rocking chair and understood something fundamental. The fight wasn't just about money anymore. It was about what Hazel would learn watching her mother choose, whether to stand up or give in, whether truth mattered more than safety. Some lessons couldn't be taught. They had to be lived. Judith drafted the counteroffer that same evening, Wednesday, December 18, 2024. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, building demands that would either force Titan into real negotiation or expose how much they feared discovery. 2.9 million. No non-disclosure agreement. Mineral rights limited to underground extraction, only surface and water sources untouchable. A written admission that Titan conducted off-lease drilling on Crane property between 1987 and 1991. $200,000 for a scholarship fund bearing Adelaide's name. She sent it at midnight. The timestamp deliberate. Let them know she worked harder than they did. Ashford's response came at 6 the next morning. Your client is overreaching. We'll see her in court. But the offer wasn't withdrawn. That was the tell. Titan still wanted settlement. They just needed to be forced into accepting they couldn't dictate terms. The FBI agent assigned to the arson case was Patricia Voss, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with the particular weariness of someone who'd spent 2 decades watching powerful people avoid consequences. She arrived at Judith's office 3 days before Christmas carrying evidence bags and a subpoena for Titan's phone records. We found Douglas Vail, private investigator with a history of corporate dirty work. His phone shows 47 calls to Titan's main number in the month before the fire. She laid out call logs, timestamps, duration, a pattern of communication that looked exactly like what it was. Wire transfer of $25,000 from a Titan consulting account to Vail's LLC 3 days before your building burned. Voss set down photographs, boot prints, tire tracks. The gasoline can with partial fingerprints that matched Vail's service record from his brief stint in the Army. Enough for federal charges. Arson, witness, intimidation, conspiracy. I'm recommending prosecution. The pressure arrived faster than expected. Titan's stock dropped 8% over the week between Christmas and New Year's as news of the FBI investigation leaked to financial reporters. The CEO faced hostile questioning during a hastily called press conference. Shareholders filed a demand for the board to investigate the kind of internal review that started friendly and turned vicious when numbers got uncomfortable. Ashford called Judith on January 8, 2025. His voice had lost the smooth confidence of earlier conversations. We need to talk. Off record. They met at a coffee shop in Knoxville 2 days later, neutral territory where neither side had home advantage. Ashford arrived alone. No junior attorneys. No paralegal with briefcases. Judith brought Nora. Deliberate. Make him look at the person he'd threatened. Ashford ordered coffee neither of them would drink. When he spoke, exhaustion edged his words. The board is nervous. The FBI investigation creates exposure beyond this case. They want it resolved. Then accept our counteroffer. I can't. Not all of it. The admission of wrongdoing, the scholarship fund, those are non-starters. Judith's expression didn't shift. Then we proceed to trial. Let discovery expose everything. Ashford's jaw tightened. Discovery goes both ways. We'll subpoena every aspect of your client's life. Her employment history, her divorce, her eviction. We'll paint her as an opportunist who abandoned a mentally ill grandmother and now exploits her death. Nora spoke quietly. Do it. I've got nothing left to lose except my daughter. And you already tried threatening her. Something crossed Ashford's face. Not quite shame, but recognition that the tactics he'd relied on weren't working against a mother protecting her child. He pulled out his phone, made a call that consisted mostly of listening, his face growing tighter with each passing second. Hung up. 2.9 million. Mineral rights underground, only surface protected. No NDA. You're free to discuss the case publicly. He paused, measuring his next words. But no admission of wrongdoing. Instead, we fund the scholarship at $150,000. We don't attach Adelaide's name publicly, but you can call it whatever you want. Judith pulled out her phone, started calculating. After taxes and my fee, Nora nets about $1.4 million. Enough to secure her future, protect the land, give Hazel education and stability. She looked at Nora. Or we go to trial. 60% chance we win bigger. 40% chance we lose everything. Either way, it takes years. Nora thought about Adelaide spending 37 years fighting alone. About Hazel's childhood being consumed by litigation instead of learning how to be young. I want one more thing. One sentence in the settlement agreement. Not an apology, just acknowledgement. Ashford's eyes narrowed. What sentence? Titan Mining acknowledges off-lease drilling occurred on Crane property between 1987 and 1991. The lawyer's face went carefully blank. That single sentence would be admissible in other cases, would open Titan to liability from every property owner adjacent to their operations, would cost them millions in future settlements. That's not minor, that's a landmine. Then detonate it now or risk worse in discovery. Another phone call. More listening. Ashford's expression darkening. They'll do it. One sentence buried in Section 22, subsection F. Factual acknowledgement, not admission of liability. Legal hair-splitting that meant everything. Judith spent the following weekend reviewing the revised settlement. 47 pages that she annotated with 2 colors of highlighter and extensive margin notes. On Monday, January 20th, 2025, she presented Nora with a summary. Total settlement $2.9 million, federal taxes at 24%, state at 5%. That's $841,000 to the government, leaves $2.059 million. My contingency fee is 33% of gross, $680,000. She wrote the numbers clearly. Your net $1,380,000. Judith continued with a detailed plan. $220,000 for complete house renovation. Professional contractors, proper permits, bringing everything to code. $60,000 for Ash's facility and care, including provisions for rescue horses. $150,000 into a trust for Hazel's education, covering undergraduate and graduate school, adjusted for inflation. $250,000 for a conservation easement through Tennessee. Land trust locking the property, forever preventing any future mining. $200,000 in emergency savings high-yield accounts, FDIC insured. $500,000 in diversified investments, index funds, and bonds. This gives you security without making you wealthy enough to be reckless. You'll need to work eventually, but not desperately. Hazel grows up stable. The land stays protected. Nora signed the settlement agreement that Tuesday afternoon, January 28, 2025. Her signature looked shaky next to the corporate attorney's confident scrawls, but it was legally binding. The wire transfer hit her new bank account at 3:47 p.m. on Wednesday, February 5, 2025. $2,059,000. The number on the screen looked fictional. Judith took her fee immediately. Professional, clean. She'd earned every dollar. The first thing Nora bought was new boots for Hazel, then a winter coat that actually insulated, small things that represented the distance they'd traveled. The story broke 3 days later, Monday, February 10th. Someone leaked the settlement terms to the Knoxville News-Sentinel. Nora suspected Walter, who'd spent 35 years watching Titan evade consequences. The headline was brutal. Mining giant admits. Decades of illegal drilling and secret settlement. The article detailed everything. Core samples. Off-lease drilling. Adelaide's ignored warnings. It quoted Section 22, subsection F, verbatim. That single sentence Titan had tried so hard to avoid. The Nashville Tennessean picked it up by Tuesday. Then the Chattanooga Times Free Press. Regional papers hungry for David and Goliath stories with corporate malfeasance and vindication for dismissed women. Titan stock dropped another 6% over the following week. The CEO announced his retirement, effective immediately, a resignation that fooled nobody. Shareholders demanded investigations. The board retained outside counsel. Internal emails started surfacing in discovery for other cases showing executives knew about the illegal drilling and authorized cover-ups. 3 families in surrounding counties came forward within 2 weeks. Suspicious drilling on their land, trespassing surveyors, warnings from Adelaide Crane that they'd dismissed. By March, a class action lawsuit had formed. Titan faced liability that made Nora's settlement look like pocket change. Clayton Ashford's name appeared in the leaked internal emails. Instructions to manage the Crane situation quietly. Approval of payments to Vail. Knowledge of intimidation tactics. The Tennessee Bar Association opened an investigation in late March. Professional conduct violations, conspiracy to commit witness tampering, subornation of perjury in his prepared motions, claiming the core samples were forged. October 15, 2025. 8 months after the settlement, Ashford was disbarred, his law license revoked permanently. His career as an attorney ended with bureaucratic finality. Nora learned about it from a newspaper article. No triumph accompanied the knowledge. Just the quiet recognition that consequences eventually found even people who thought themselves immune. Douglas Vail fared worse. Federal charges for arson and witness intimidation. 15 years minimum. He took a plea deal in September that still meant 8 years in a medium security facility. Titan Mining announced in July that they were closing their Tennessee operations, called it operational restructuring. Everyone understood it as retreat. 200 people lost jobs by August. The town of Millbrook felt the economic impact immediately. Local resentment toward Nora grew in direct proportion to unemployment numbers. Someone spray-painted "Greed Kills Jobs" on a building near Judith's office. The grocery store owner refused to sell to Nora. Hazel, now 11, got shoved in the school hallway by a classmate whose father had worked Titan's processing plant, but others stepped forward quietly. Ruth brought Hazel books without being asked. Whitmore invited Nora to community meetings about watershed protection. Walter, in his final weeks before dying in November, organized a fundraiser for families who'd lost Titan jobs. Nora contributed anonymously. $50,000. Not their fault the company had built an empire on theft. By December, a year after the fight began, 3 more families had filed suits against Titan's successor companies. All referenced Section 22, subsection F from Nora's settlement. That single sentence became the key unlocking dozens of cases. Nora testified as an expert witness twice. She didn't enjoy it, but understood the responsibility. The first testimony came in March 2026 for a family whose well had been contaminated by Titan drilling. The courtroom in Knoxville was newer than Millbrook's, designed for larger cases. Nora sat in the witness box explaining how she'd found the evidence, what Whitmore discovered, how Judith built the case, what Titan tried to hide. The opposing counsel tried to paint her as an opportunist. Cross-examination was brutal personal, designed to undermine credibility. But the jury saw something else. A woman who'd chosen fight over safety, who'd refused to be silenced. Verdict came back after 2 days of deliberation. $4.2 million for the plaintiffs. The second testimony was in May 2026 for a class action on behalf of 12 families, this time in federal court, Nashville. Marble and mahogany, the architecture of justice taking itself seriously. Nora's Section 22, subsection F, was the cornerstone of their case, proving a pattern of illegal activity. Settlement came before it reached a jury. $18 million distributed among the families. Each case cited Adelaide's name. A woman who died alone was now cited in legal precedent. Her legacy spreading. August 2026. 18 months after the wire transfer marked the completion of something larger than just Nora's fight. The cabin transformation was finished. The roof was new metal panels in deep charcoal that would outlast generations. Triple-pane windows kept heat in and weather out. New electrical wiring and solar panels on the south-facing slope provided enough power to sell excess back to the grid. The porch was rebuilt from pressure-treated lumber and composite decking. Fresh cream paint made the exterior look intentional. Inside, refinished oak floors, granite counters, and cherry cabinets in the kitchen. A modern heat pump, though Nora kept the old cast-iron stove as decoration because Adelaide would have appreciated the gesture. Hazel's bedroom had new drywall insulation and a window that locked securely. The bathroom had hot water on demand. It was still recognizably Adelaide's house. The bones hadn't changed, but the structure had been loved back to life. Ash's facility sat 50 yards away. A 20 by 30-foot barn with rubber mat flooring, infrared heaters, automatic waterers. The old horse, now 30, shared the space with 2 other rescues from an auction, an Appaloosa mare with a crooked foreleg, a bay gelding too old for anyone to want. The 3 of them stood in the paddock that August morning, sunlight catching their coats, living proof that being unwanted wasn't permanent. That same weekend, the town gathered for 2 dedications. The stone building site had been rebuilt, transformed into a memorial. Funded partially by the settlement, partially by community donations from people who'd known Adelaide, remembered her warnings, felt ashamed. They hadn't listened. Saturday, August 17, 2026. 200 people attended. Whitmore and Ruth stood at the entrance beside a newly installed bronze plaque. Adelaide Crane, 1941 to 2023. Keeper of proof. Below it, smaller text. She told the truth before anyone profited from hearing it. Inside, behind glass, were 3 core samples that had started everything. labeled with coordinates and mineral content. A timeline on the wall documented Adelaide's 37-year fight. County meeting minutes, her handwritten letters to officials, the dismissals, the hidden evidence, the vindication that came too late for her to witness. Whitmore spoke briefly, factual, scientific, but his voice cracked when he said, "I wish I'd listened 30 years ago." Ruth spoke about the library creating a wing in Adelaide's name, housing her papers, local history archives, documents from the Titan case, so that women's voices would never be silenced again. Then Nora stood at the podium, Hazel beside her, and spoke to the gathering. "My grandmother spent 37 years being called crazy. She died alone. But she wasn't wrong, and she wasn't alone, not really. She had truth. And truth doesn't die. It waits." Her voice steadied. "For granddaughters brave enough to come home. For great-granddaughters smart enough to decode what's hidden. For communities willing to finally listen." Sunday they dedicated the first annual Adelaide Crane Teaching Scholarship, $10,000 to an elementary teacher who taught children to question and think. The local school district had already started bringing fourth graders to the memorial on field trips. Ruth led tours explaining how corporations could harm communities and how one person with documentation could challenge power. The scholarship winner was a young female science teacher from Knoxville named Sarah Mitchell. No relation to Whitmore, but he presented the award anyway. Hazel, now 11 and poised beyond her years, handed the check to Sarah. The winner's speech was brief but carried weight. Mrs. Crane's legacy reminds us that teaching isn't just curriculum, it's empowerment, showing children their voices matter. That truth matters. That one person really can change everything. By September, the mayor had proposed the Adelaide Crane Water Protection Act, legislation requiring mining companies to disclose all drilling activity within 1 mile of residential water sources. It passed the town council unanimously in October. The conservation easement was finalized that fall, $250,000 to Tennessee Land Trust. The 80 acres could never be developed, logged commercially, or mined. The agreement bound in perpetuity. Titan's mineral rights acquired through the settlement had reverted to state ownership when the company abandoned Tennessee. The governor quietly transferred them to the Department of Conservation in November. Hazel started 6th grade that year. The transition from elementary had been smoother than expected. She'd made friends, found her place, started a project digitally archiving Adelaide's papers and journals for the memorial. Nora enrolled in an online nursing program in January 2027. Her license was still valid, just dormant. 6 months of coursework would bring her current. The local clinic had already indicated interest in hiring her once certified. Life developed rhythms, morning routines, school, homework, dinner together, weekend hikes, visits to Ash, community health events where Nora was learning to be part of a town again. Wednesday, March 12, 2027. 2 years and 1 month since the wire transfer hit her account. Nora stood in front of a community health class at the Millbrook Community Center. 15 mothers with young children. Topic: reading medical information and questioning doctors. She used Adelaide's methods without realizing it at first. Hands-on, question-based, empowering people to trust their own observations. What do you see in this label? What questions should we ask? The mothers engaged. Thinking. Questioning. Some were former students of Adelaide's, now raising their own children in the same town where their teacher had been dismissed as crazy. One woman approached after class. "My grandmother knew yours. She said Adelaide Crane found treasure." Nora smiled, genuine warmth in it. She found something better than treasure. She found truth worth more than gold. Walking home through the spring forest, Hazel met her halfway. She'd been visiting Ash after school, checking on the rescue horses. "Mom, Ash is 30 now. The vet says he's a miracle." Nora looked at the mountains rising green with new growth around them. "This whole mountain is a miracle." At the cabin they sat on the porch with lemonade, warm sun on their faces. the memorial visible on the hill, Adelaide's legacy preserved in stone and stories, and the changed laws that protected water and land. Hazel pulled a journal from her backpack, one of Adelaide's which she studied with the dedication some kids gave to video games. Found another entry I missed. Listen, she read aloud. June 1990. Today Nora asked why I keep fighting when nobody listens. I told her I fight so one day someone will listen. Maybe not me. Maybe her. Maybe her daughter. Truth doesn't have an expiration date. It waits. Nora's throat tightened. She was waiting for us. That evening after dinner, Nora found herself in Adelaide's old bedroom. The journals were preserved now in archival boxes, but one remained out. The last one dated 2022 and 2023 that she'd never fully explored. She opened it to the final pages, found a letter tucked inside addressed in Adelaide's handwriting. To Nora, when she comes home. Dated a week before Adelaide died, February 2023. Nora sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed where she'd slept as a child, and read slowly. Dear Nora, if you're reading this, you found your way back. I never doubted you would. Running at 17 wasn't cowardice. It was survival. Coming back at 33, that's courage. The land is yours. The truth is yours. The choice is yours. But remember, the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's knowing you come from women who don't quit. Your mother ran, but she gave you life. I fought, and I give you knowledge. You, my dear, you'll do both. You'll live and fight. And Hazel, she'll do even more. That's how we win. Not in one generation. In 3. I love you. I always have. I always will. Now go make me proud. Teach what I taught you. Truth buried is still truth waiting. With all my love, Grandma Adelaide. Nora sat there for a long time, letter in her lap, tears on her face. The weight of legacy and love and the stubborn insistence that some truths demanded telling regardless of cost. She thought about the journey. November 2024, arriving with $37 and nothing else. The bootprints, the fire, the threats, the choice to fight when money would have been easier. 2 years later, she had a home. Hazel had friends. The land was protected. Adelaide's name was honored. Other families were winning their cases. But more than that, she understood what Adelaide had been trying to teach her all along. That integrity wasn't convenient. It was necessary. The bedrock everything else built upon. Later, after Hazel was in bed, Nora sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and looked at the walls around her. Adelaide's photo with her posthumous Educator Award, Nora's nursing license beside her community health certificate, Hazel's science project titled 3 Generations of Women Who Didn't Quit. Outside through the window she could see Ash in his paddock with the other rescue horses. 30 years old, an impossible survivor, the mountains rose eternal behind them. She heard movement from Hazel's room. Her daughter was still awake. Nora walked quietly down the hall. Hazel sat at her desk, bent over a fresh journal, her handwriting still forming, still young, but already purposeful. Can't sleep. Hazel looked up. I wanted to write this down while I remember. What's that everything? How we got here. What Grandma Adelaide did. What you did. So one day when I have kids, they'll know. She turned the journal so Nora could see the first page. Dear future Hazel had written at the top. This is how 3 generations of women changed everything. Nora's vision blurred. She sat on the edge of Hazel's bed. That's perfect. Hazel went back to writing. Her pen moved steadily across the page, documenting a legacy that would outlive them all. Nora watched for a moment, then stood, kissed her daughter's head. Don't stay up too late. I won't. Hazel didn't look up, absorbed in the work of preservation. Back in the kitchen, Nora stood at the window. The first stars appeared above the mountains. Inside, her daughter documented truth so it wouldn't be forgotten. Outside, the land they'd fought for stretched, protected into the distance. The best inheritance isn't what you're given, Nora thought. It's what you pass on. And they were just getting started. She turned off the kitchen light, checked the doors one final time out of habit more than necessity, and walked down the hall to her room. Through Hazel's doorway she could see her daughter still writing, preserving, ensuring that Adelaide's truth would echo forward through generations yet to come. Some truths demand telling regardless of personal cost. Not because the telling will be rewarded, but because silence corrodes everything it touches. Adelaide told the truth when it cost her everything. Nora told it when the stakes were different, but the principle identical. And Hazel would grow up understanding that one person armed with truth and unwilling to be silent really could change everything. Nora lay in bed in a house that was warm and safe, and theirs listening to the mountains settling into night around them. No fear, no watching, just the steady rhythm of a life built on integrity instead of compromise. Outside, ash grazed in moonlight. Inside, Hazel's pen scratched across paper, writing the story that needed to be told. The mountains had remembered. The memorial would teach. The protected acres would endure. 3 generations of women had proven that power could be challenged, corporations could be stopped, and truth buried was still truth waiting. Nora closed her eyes and slept deeply, and without fear for the first time in as long as she could remember.